What's up? This is Rebel Radio.
What up? What up? This is DJ Newmark.
This is Peanut Butter Wolf.
It's your boy. It's okay.
Keep checking out Rebel Radio.
Rebel Radio.
This is Rebel Radio.
We're in the place right here. Rebel Radio is going down.
Would you say Rebel Radio?
Oh, wait. Let's do it again.
Rebel Radio.
What's up, Rebels? Welcome back to Rebel Radio, the weekly show where we talk to the rebels who are shaping our culture. We learn how they do it, why they do it, and how you can get a little piece of the pie for yourself. I'm your host, Josh Levine. My guest this week is Thez one half of People Under the Stairs. He's a rapper, he's the producer, he's the manager, he designs the merch, he runs all of the business. He's a real DIY type of dude, and he's gonna tell us how he's built a business that's continued to thrive over the years, how they keep making music after there's no more genres. He's going to tell us a little bit about his beef with will.i.am and why competition is good for creativity, right after our EDM.com track of the week.
Cause I'm locked up cause it did it for dinero. Yeah. Go and get it, Papa say you signed with the devil, whole lot. Lot of things change, really hard to do it for the love when it's pain. Lot of people say what they want like they yay, but the two hype kids really need to go and play.
Yo, that was Jay Nolan with 24/7, the EDM.com track of the week. Rebel Radio is the only show that brings you new music every week from our friends over at EDM.com. So get over there, check out some new music. And now let's get into the interview with Thez One.
I appreciate you being here, man.
Yeah.
I'm glad to see you still doing it.
Yep.
And, I kind of was following you guys in the early days. I used to work at Herb Magazine doing marketing, and obviously they were big fans.
Yeah. We did get a lot of love.
There. Yeah,
a lot of
for
love
sure.
back in the day. God, I miss those days too.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing I don't miss about those days is we used to finish a song or a record, and then it wouldn't get released for like 6 months because they had to service print, and then it would take like 2 months to like get and
for sure.
So we would make songs and then not hear them for like 5 months, and then all of a sudden it would be a single.
Yeah.
And now
it's already old to you.
Yeah, and now like if you make a song, it's on SoundCloud on Friday.
Right. Yeah.
Different time frame.
So crazy. Well, it seems like everything's changed since back then.
Yeah.
What about so you guys, I want to get into some of your history and that, but I was thinking on the way here about just, you guys were kind of like, this staple of this underground scene, here on the West Coast for sure, and all over. And what does that even mean today to be underground hip hop and
I would say, honestly, it's probably, for me personally, it's the last thing I would want someone to tack on to the front of our name,
Sure.
Because I feel like it's easy to marginalize a group as an underground hip hop group. And in 2017, I think partly what has happened since print has gone away and since kind of, we're living in like a post-apocalyptic entertainment industry now, world. And I feel like the consumers, the fans, don't place as much of an emphasis on genre anymore.
Yeah.
I know I don't.
Sure.
Like if you were to go into my phone, you could skip through what I've been listening to, and it's not all underground hip hop. In fact, if anything, it's not hip hop or underground hip hop at all. Like there are certain things that might fall into it, but I'd be more inclined to listen to like Tori Moi or like independent rock stuff or Grizzly Bear or whatever. Like I have a huge arc of what I'm exposed to now, and it wasn't like that in 1998 when I just was like, I am an underground hip hop fan.
Right.
So for me, for us, for People on the Stairs or what I do musically, I think it's more beneficial to just sort of drop, to kind of push away from underground hip hop or hip hop at all and just kind of be an act, because I feel like it opens you up to fans, and it's just really hard to fit in a genre anymore. And if you do fit into a genre, then you have to use all the sort of like tropes of the genre, like it's underground hip hop and it's like drama, stab, horns and scratching and it doesn't allow us to evolve as musicians within that style of music.
Sure.
So.
Well, that's one of the things I always get hung up on is so genre yeah, across music, I think is just becoming less important.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, there's the way you describe it is that it's limiting, right? But I think the flip side to that is that it's, you know, if you identified in 98 as an underground hip hop act, you kind of knew what to do.
That's true.
Like you had a limited palette of
Right.
sounds and topics.
Yeah.
And all of that, right?
It's easy to find your fan base. It's
Yeah.
easy to get discovered. It's easy to book shows because they're like,
Right.
we have a underground hip hop act coming to town.
Exactly.
And you know, and so yeah, that was the huge benefit of it. And then the other thing was, you know, I think it was easier for people to be fans of a certain thing because they were like, you know, if you were a dance music fan, you're like, I like dance music. If you were a rock music fan, you're like, I like rock music. Now you get rock music with dance music, and,
Right.
and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
all like, and everything's just been smeared, and so
You don't know what to hate anymore.
exactly. And like you don't know how to find a fan anymore, you know?
Well, you know, people that listen to the show have heard me ask this question, but you know, from the fan side, what does that do now? Right, because when I was a hip hop fan growing up,
Right.
I knew how to dress.
Right.
I knew the slang to use.
Right, right.
Like it was a package deal.
You knew the handshake.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
you knew who to hang out with.
Right.
At school, or if you went to a party, you'd see the certain sneakers.
Right.
And you're like, okay, that's my dude right
Right,
there.
right.
You know.
Yeah.
And now it's like all those walls are down.
Yeah.
So what are fans supposed to do?
I think on one hand, well, this is the good and the bad thing, right? Like on one hand, I think at its very best, people are encouraged, fans, music lovers are encouraged to just like what they like.
Yeah.
But that whole idea is obviously being undermined by the genius, the algorithms,
Uh-huh.
the
Yeah.
things that get pushed to you based upon what they think you'll like.
For sure.
Which means that there's a perception that you're actually choosing what you're listening to. But as we both know, being veterans in the industry, there's
don't do that.
always something being fed to you in
Yeah.
a certain way. And
Well, I just heard, I was listening to an interview on the way here on Combat Jack with Steve Rifkin, who's an old record promoter guy,
Right.
label guy. And he was just talking about, I forget what record it was, but Akon, which was his biggest
right,
hit. And he was like, I got that record and I just decided I was going to shove it down people's throats for a year until it broke.
right,
And it became his biggest hit of his career.
right,
And like, but that's not a unique story. That's what the record industry is set up to do,
yeah,
is keep showing you something until you like it.
right. And I think, you know, it's as much advertising and lifestyle marketing as it is just music anymore. And
Yeah.
you know, I mean, I think I read this morning, like Gucci Mane got another $10 million
Saw
deal.
that.
Yeah, and part of me thinks, where is, you know, like the old school part of me goes, where's the 10 million coming?
Right.
How are they going to generate
Yeah.
10 million in recoupables when no one buys music anymore? But then I have to remind myself that the real value is in content. It's in the advertising that goes in the front of the video. It's all of these subversive ways that we're being marketed to as
Sure.
music fans,
Yeah.
you know, and the music is secondary. So, you know, in terms of going back to like genre and like what people like, I think there's the idea that with streaming music, with playlists, with Pandora, that it's not being manipulated, that you're in control of
Yeah,
it. But I
that's fair.
think as we know, there's always manipulation going
For
on.
sure. For sure.
And that's a bummer.
Well, I want to go back to how it got started for you. Do you remember the first record you ever bought?
First record I ever bought, man, I remember taking my parents, like records that were my parents' records, and kind of like making them mine. And
So
I had this.
What's the one that like
well,
kinda blew your mind?
I remember. Well, it was when I realized what sampling was. So
Uh-huh.
like there was this Big Daddy Kane song, and they had like the whole. I didn't know what it was, but I remember listening to my parents' records and hearing the Staple Singer, like
yeah.
Sam going like Big Daddy, and I was like, oh, I can't believe that's they somehow, you know, and then taking the 45, the Staple Singer 45, and kind of bringing it back and putting what I had seen in Beat Street and Wild Style, putting that all together and going, oh damn, this is a thing.
Yeah.
And I love this music, and you know, that was really when I wanted to become a producer. I was super young, because I didn't see myself, like I saw rappers as being like LL Cool J,
Right.
and like these guys that stood on top of like,
Yeah, it didn't seem attainable.
no, they were like, you know, jumped on turntables and grabbed dudes by the neck, and I was a fan, but I didn't ever think that I would ever do that.
Right.
So I saw myself as always being kind of a music guy, and then that led me down a road where I was buying tons of just music, you know, being exposed to music, buying tapes, going to Music Plus, going to, you know, wherever I could to get, and I spent all my money on music when I was a kid, and then I saved up and got a sampler, and you know, it was the only thing I ever wanted to do. Like everything else I did in my life was just trying to help me attain this goal of buying equipment and learning how to do it, and,
That's cool.
and making beats, and yeah, that's all I ever wanted to do.
And were you just making beats by yourself, or was somebody teaching you?
No, I just was kind of figuring it out as I went.
Yeah.
And then when I was in high school, I met Double K, who was my partner in People
Mm-hmm.
on the Stairs. He was at Hamilton, and I was at Loyola.
Okay.
And the guys that I knew at Loyola who knew him, they were like, yeah, there's this guy that makes beats at Hamilton. He's better than you. And so they had set up this crosstown rivalry between
Yeah.
us. And when we finally met at Martin's Records, we had a whole like beat showdown.
Uh-huh.
And I think we both realized that day that we could talk about music to each other that we couldn't talk about to other people. Like
Right.
we could talk about Roy Ayers and Bob James and this and that at the same time talking about the Beatnuts and
Mm-hmm.
Wu-Tang and whatever. A lot of people I knew weren't into music like that. So that created it was an arms race between him and I. It's who could make the most beats, the best beats, and that
Yeah.
competition, out of that competition, we finally realized that we didn't want to give what we were making to other people. Because the MCs that we were giving beats to at the time, the industry stuff we were doing, I think we both could already see us getting taken advantage of. You know, there were independent labels we were giving beats to,
Yeah.
you know, each of us on our own, and we
Sure.
were both getting our ass handed to us.
Yeah.
And so finally we were like, you know what, we're just gonna rap over these and release it ourselves. Because it's better than selling this stuff to labels and losing all control over it. And that was kind of how the group started. And then, you know.
So where did that? Because earlier you say you didn't have the confidence that you could rap, right? And
Yeah.
you didn't think that was available to you.
Right.
So what changed?
I mean, I think what changed was, you know, when I was a kid, I didn't see any Latino rappers really
Yeah.
that I felt were worth anything. So I had this sort of notion in my head that it was like it was like these dudes from New York and from LA, and I didn't fit into that.
Yeah.
And I came from a like lower middle class household. Like it wasn't.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not an NWA. Like I don't, you know,
Right.
but I can make music.
Right.
And then, you know, seeing like the Beatnuts and Curious and other like Latino rappers come out, and I was like, oh man, maybe like there is a lane. Like it's not so much about. And underground hip hop was more diverse than
Right.
commercial hip hop.
For sure.
And that was one of the things that we felt early on, was that the A&Rs and the people we were dealing with in the industry, they were looking for a certain look in addition to the music.
Yeah.
And it was nauseating to us. So we started flying that underground flag really hard because we felt like, you know, we didn't fit in.
Yeah.
And so we took the name People Under the Stairs kind of regrettably at the time, because we were like, yeah, man, People Under the Stairs, we're underground. We don't,
Right.
you know.
Yeah, of course.
And as you know, like that at the time, the harder you rode for the underground, like it meant something to really be a part of that.
Yeah.
You know, we would go to Gavin and Rap Sheet, and we would go to all these conventions, and we'd be the ones that were in the front row at every show that came through, and just studying how things went down, and trying to learn from the mistakes that we saw Loud Records making, or other, you know, just trying to learn from what was happening and start our own label, you know.
What was well, first, what was, so thinking about Latino hip hop, like what was the first record that like opened your eyes to that?
I mean, there were a couple of big ones like Cypress Hill, obviously. Just seeing more diversity in underground, like Curious, Cypress Hill, Beatnuts, like all that sort of stuff that started kind of coming around in the early 90s. I know there was Kid Frost and other stuff prior to that, but I also didn't feel like I fell into the sort of
Mentirosa.
Yeah, I didn't.
It wasn't good.
Like I was like, yeah, it's like, and the whole like Chicano rap scene
Yeah.
existed, but I didn't feel like I fit into that either. I just felt like I was a rap fan, and and so I think there was.
I mean, that definitely felt like ghettoized.
Yeah.
Like to its own thing, right? Like, Kid Frost and Mellow Man Ace. And,
Right.
What were those kids?
Lighter Shade of Brown.
Yeah, Lighter Shade of Brown.
Yeah.
Like, it definitely felt like this isn't regular hip hop. Like, it's its own thing.
Exactly. It was an ethnic sub-genre of hip hop, and I didn't want to have any part of that either, because that was just as bad as any other kind of like pandering.
For sure.
But
so when you talk about seeing like Loud Records, what's an example of a mistake they were making?
I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say necessarily like a mistake, because they released some great stuff, but knowing people who were like kind of going through the process of trying to get signed.
Yeah.
And we were friends with like we knew like Big B and all those guys. We looked up to them, but I saw the sort of politics, like seeing people's records get shelved, or seeing or like just seeing like Large Professor sign to like Geffen and having like the record shelved, things like that.
Yeah.
It was scary, like, because we wanted to be part of the industry, but we also didn't want to be controlled by a label, whether it be like Delicious Vinyl or like any of these. We were just like very cautious, and so we just were flying that underground flag really hard, maybe a little too hard, because then we started looking at anyone who got signed as being like a sellout.
Of course.
And I'm not sure in retrospect if that's necessarily true either, because there were a lot of good people in the industry who I think were trying to help the artists. But, like my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, was working at, what was it? American?
Def American.
Def American.
Yeah.
And she had friends at Wild West and like whatever. And, I mean, it was just the low-key horror stories. Things that weren't like public information, but like, just really scary stuff that was happening to artists. And of course, people signing their life away in deals and not really realizing, what was happening. So
when you thought about that and starting your own label, like, what is the, tell me about now, like, what does it mean to be a label, and what is that, what value does that create in the ecosystem?
I mean, then being a label meant that you had an account at a pressing plant, that you were able to give terms to distributors.
Yeah.
You were like dropping product off net 90 and like, you were running a business.
Sure.
And you had accounts receivable and all this sort of stuff. Now with digital distribution and SoundCloud and TuneCore and all these sort of things, I don't think it's not even the same thing anymore. You could say, hey, I'm running a record label, and it's like, well, what does that mean? Like, I put stuff up on SoundCloud for people.
Right.
So
you're like a webmaster.
Yeah, you're a webmaster. You manage a social media account where you put a bunch of photos up, and we signed with Ohm Records kind of soon after we released our stuff independently. Then we were off Ohm Records, and they were like an independent label, but like a big ass independent label.
Right.
And we benefited some from what the infrastructure they were able to provide. Like, they had distribution channels, and I soon realized that like when Music Plus and Tower Records and that whole thing started to fall, I'm like, damn, how are we gonna sell? How are we gonna distribute? How are we gonna, And I had a deal with WIA, but I was like, I couldn't even like make enough product to get to WIA to all, like they were just like laughing at me, like, what do you. So labels were important when physical really mattered, but now it's like, I know like kids who are 16 who are like, yeah, I run a record label. And I'm like, oh, tight. Yeah, it's awesome.
Sure.
It's good for you. I don't, for me, running the label now, what I do, it means, manufacturing merchandise. It means controlling the digital rights to everything, making sure that everything's in place, filing the appropriate paperwork with Sound Exchange and ASCAP and all these, just, making sure that you're there when a licensing request comes through and that you're handling things in a prompt fashion. And I think that's something that the younger generation doesn't quite understand yet.
Well, I think that's interesting because to me, the untold story of the music business is just how hard it has always been for the people that make music to get paid from it.
Yeah.
right? And whether that was, shady, like straight up just people robbing them,
Right.
which has happened,
Right.
it happens every year, or just like the confusing distribution networks and all of that, right? And so now, with all best intentions, it's still really difficult to figure out how much money you're supposed to get from YouTube and from all these different services, and right?
Yeah, and I think
because shit just now gets out there, and then you have these collection companies that got to go find it and ID the files and all that shit.
And I think younger artists now don't realize that it is. I had a hard time wrapping my head around this, that you can monetize content.
Yeah.
That Gucci Mane is worth $10 million. It's just not $10 million in tangible record sales.
Sure.
So it's easy for young artists to sign a 360 deal and get taken advantage of in a way they can't even fathom, because they don't realize that the McDonald's commercial that runs at the head of their YouTube clip is generating revenue that's being collected by the person who,
Yeah.
And those secondary streams of revenue that are coming in from all these different directions, if someone's in a position to collect them, you can still, the industry still exists, We're in a new studio, someone's making money.
Yeah. Well, and all the news is about how now it's growing and it's bounced back and it's, know.
Yeah, so
maybe, not necessarily for the artists.
No, artists are still, I mentor a handful of younger artists, and I'm always cautious to I try not to tell them too much, because these kids nowadays, you tell them something and they immediately kind of shut down. And I respect that, because the things I experienced in the industry, a lot of the knowledge I have from the 90s and the early 2000s is completely useless.
Sure.
For instance, we used to have to pay for music videos.
Right.
These kids don't pay for music videos. Like, their friend has a 7D.
They just make them.
And they make them.
Yeah.
And they're out and they're making videos, 100 videos, generating content. And my old ass, when I'm like, okay, we need to make a music video, and I'm like, oh, what's our budget and what's our storyboard? And it for me, it still seems like this massive undertaking. And for these kids, it's run and gun.
Yeah.
And there's definitely, that helps them navigate the sort of, I guess the world we live in now, and it makes me sort of less apt at, because I'm like an album every 2 years, a big music video, a big single release, and that's just such an archaic, irrelevant business model.
For sure.
So I think those of us who are still around and are still running the same labels, we've had to really change how we look at things, how we operate,
So it's not like, you go into the business side almost more out of necessity, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Again, going back in the day, you could just be an artist.
Yeah.
You get your advance, you get carted around, you come into a nice studio.
Yeah.
And then you just sit back and wait, or you tour.
Was there a break that you remember as an artist when you hit a point where everything got easier, or you?
In our career?
Yeah.
Nah, everything's been tough.
Yeah.
I still work at night. I have kids now, I put my kids to bed.
Sure.
And I'll stay up and work.
Yeah.
And when I say work, it's not always the same thing. It may be working in the studio, but I'm not always just working in the studio. Sometimes I'm have an Excel spreadsheet and I'm doing sound exchange royalty. Or I'm designing a t-shirt for merch and putting it on the website and whatever, and doing all these things that'll help make sure that we have the money to stay in the studio and keep working.
So how do you keep the business from interfering with the art?
I think one of the things that's helped, us and what I do is I realize that the business is generated from the fans, and the fans are generated from the art.
Yeah.
So I think it's really easy for some people to start chasing one or the other too hard and not have that balance, or forget maybe why someone might be buying a t-shirt or a sweatshirt. And I try to always remind myself that, they're here for the music first.
Mm-hmm.
So in this day and age, if that means we give away the music for free and we pick up money from these other things, that's what it has to do, because we can't have any barrier of entry to the music. you can't be Metallica fighting the inevitable march of progress. You know,
Right.
like I think watching that unfold in the mid 2000s and watching artists end up on the wrong side
Yeah.
of that argument and basically being at odds with their fans, telling their fans like,
Yeah.
I know you like your music, but like F you guys, like
Yeah.
don't share it, don't, you
Yeah.
know. That was short-sighted business-wise.
Of course.
So, you know, I try to always remind myself everything I do, you know, the fans are here because of the music, give them the music, the other stuff will come. And then when it comes to selling other things to them, merchandise or whatever, keeping it personal, keeping it, you know, making sure that I don't take advantage of them. Like I don't put up vinyl for pre-sale and then order the vinyl when I get the money.
Mm-hmm.
Like I order the vinyl, wait 2 months, put the vinyl up for sale and ship it in a week or two.
Right.
You know, I think there's a lot of things that people do nowadays, especially where I read about it or I see it happening. And I'm just like, man, this is not good. And it hurts all of us, all of our trust with our fans, you know?
Yeah.
Or even like dumb stuff like the Antisocial Social Club not shipping orders for like 6 months or whatever.
Right.
It's like, damn, dude, you have $500,000 in orders you haven't shipped in a way that affects all of us who are doing online sort of like limited sales and, you know, releases and stuff.
But I think that's a good example. I was just at ComplexCon this weekend.
Okay.
And like last year, Antisocial Social Club was like, just blew up out of nowhere. Like right around
Right.
that time. It was right before that, but then there at the show, they had the booth with Undefeated, and it
Right.
was just like
Is that when they
everywhere.
had the pink car in the booth? Or
Yeah, it was a camo.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. And then this year, it's gone.
They're in big trouble right now.
Yeah,
You know,
there's like a few people walking around in shirts, but
Yeah.
but you could tell that that moment was over for them.
and there's a petition going around right now that they're trying to get to like the Board of Commerce and to go after them.
Really?
Yeah, because it's
Wow.
like we're not talking a few orders. We're not talking
Yeah.
$60,000.
Yeah.
We're talking like $500,000 to $1 million.
Yeah.
And as someone who is running a brand that is through our music and whatever, watching that unfold, it's basically, again, it's one of those things where like, here's what I have to make sure we never end up in this position.
Yeah.
Because the trust that we have from e-commerce and our fans and all that stuff, like that's everything,
Yeah.
you know. And if you blow that, like you said, like it'll go down
Right.
quick.
Yeah.
You know.
So what happens? Like, if I just looked on paper, like, you're an artist, producer, most people in your position have such a little understanding of their business, right? And they show up an hour late and they're high and they're like, there's all these cliches, but they're
Right, right,
true
right.
in a lot of
For
cases.
sure.
We've seen it.
Yep.
My thought, I read the Gucci Mane thing last night, and my first thought, because I'm an old dude, was like, who the fuck tweets that you got $10 million?
Right.
Like, you deserve to get robbed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's the artist way, right? So you got Bow Wow, like on the private plane, you have
Right.
this thing, like,
Right.
so what I'm wondering is, like, what makes you different? Like, where did you find the ability to create a different path for yourself? Where's that come
Yeah,
from?
it's a great question. I mean, part of it was how we're going back to what we were talking about, watching the artists and watching how things were handled. And one of the things that I saw super early in the 90s, in early 2000s, was everyone had a manager.
Yeah.
And I saw the distributors. There was a distributor in the Valley named Ground Level who we ended up winning a lawsuit against. But they owed us money. They owed Hyro money. They owed all these people money, and they were basically in the wind.
Yeah.
And the managers of all these groups were dealing with them, and we didn't have a manager, and so I was dealing with
You
them.
never had a manager?
No, we never had a manager.
Wow.
Partly in part in the beginning, just because I figured I can do it, it's easier. But I realized that like the managers might not have been negotiating in the best interest of the artist. You know what I mean? Because they were taking settlements with the distributors just so that they could get their money and move on.
Right.
And
Yeah,
I was like, no, I need, So then I was like, man, that was like the first time when I realized that like the business side is if the business goes south, it'll kill the artistic vision.
Right.
And so I don't trust a manager to handle that for us. I want to be in charge of that. So then I started handling a lot of the business things. But the biggest change happened when we started touring a lot. We were touring Europe a lot. When you tour Europe a lot, you kind of get carted around.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a pretty big run in Europe. We did Glastonbury, we did Reading, Leeds. This was all prior to 2000. In 2001, we did Glastonbury with David Bowie and all these big people.
Wow.
And I was coming home, and I'd come home to LA, and I still couldn't book a show for $150 in LA.
Yeah.
And so me and Mike, my partner, were talking like, man, this is not right. Like, I don't want to be famous in Europe.
Yeah.
I want to be here in the States where people know what I'm talking about, where, you know, it was, so we're like, well, what do we do? Well, we got to get an agent. So we found an agent who was willing to pick us up, Mike Morey. He was working for the agency group at the time, and he was under Peter Schwartz. So we were like, man, we are Peter Schwartz, like early, you know, just epic agent for
sure.
hip hop acts. Arguably, I think the first hip hop artist agent.
Maybe so, yeah.
And so, you know, his assistant started taking on acts, and we basically, I made a lot of promises to Mike. I was like, Mike Morey, I was like, you know, pick us up, put us on tour with someone, you know, we'll do the grunt work, we'll do whatever we have to do. We just want to start touring in the States. So he was like, all right, he was booking Calicom at the time. No, he was booking the Deltron tour at the time.
Okay.
So he said, how about you guys go and open for the Deltron tour?
Yeah.
That I was like, 70
Perfect.
cities, that sounds
Perfect.
amazing.
Yeah.
How much do we get paid? You get paid $200 a night.
Yeah.
So I'm doing the math. I'm like, dude, I don't think we can make it across the United States at $200 a night. But we did it, and we were able to do it because we didn't have a manager, and we didn't have a merch guy.
Yeah.
So that was like, well, I guess I'll drive the car. We'll sit in a rental. We'll sell our own merch after every show, and we can make it work on $200 a night. Over time, 200 became 500, 500 became 1,000. We're second opener, then we're the headliner, and then I'm still managing. And it actually became really easy, but it was really out of necessity and willingness to just work and learn that side of the industry. When we started doing colleges, they wanted to pay us in checks.
Right.
And I was like, getting these checks, and they were like, so who do we make the check out to? And I'm like, neither of us, because of taxes.
Right.
So then I talked to Mike. I was like, man, we got to start like a business entity. We got to be able to take these checks. So then I started a corporation called PSOC, and that basically became the People on the Stairs touring business entity. So when we rented a car, when I bought airplane tickets, all that, it started going on the Amex card for PSOC. And then when we started, then we're like, well, we need to make more merch. So next thing you know, like, you go from being like an opener to then you're managing like a headline run.
Yeah.
And you're like, you know, you have accounts, you have merch, you have all this and that. So that was kind of, I just kind of fell into it, but I realized that I loved doing it, and it didn't bother me. It wasn't a burden.
Yeah.
You know, because I saw these other acts with managers, you know, and I'm like at the end of the night, I'd be sitting there going over the numbers, like, how many did we do at the door?
Right.
What can we do better next time? And I think that really allowed us to tour the way we did. You know, we toured pretty strong for 20 years in the States, and we went to the point where we could sell out shows in every city, and there weren't a lot, especially during the recession. 2007, 2008, 2009, not a lot of people were out touring.
Yeah.
It was tough. You know, we were still out there pounding the pavement, playing Milwaukee, and, you know, like,
wow,
we did it.
Nice.
You know, I wouldn't want to do it again, but
yeah.
Sorry for the long rant, but that's
No,
how
that's
the business,
great.
how
Well,
I fell into it, you know.
I mean, that's great because, you know, I can relate. I mean, I started my career as a manager, and, you know, I think I can see that it's like, I think you have to work hard in that job to add value, because you're, in a sense, in the way. That's your job, right?
Unless your artist really needs someone taking care of, which a lot of artists do.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. But I get it that like, you know, on the one hand, it's not your money. It's part of your money as a manager, right? But so you're maybe not going to fight as hard.
Yeah.
You know, on the other hand, you know, I've had this conversation where you get opportunities that for the manager who's making 15, 20%, like, you need that commission, but it's maybe not the best opportunity for the artist.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So no, I think there's definitely like some conflicts there that, and like you said, some artists, you know, can't get up in the morning
Yeah.
if they don't have somebody dragging them out of bed or whatever.
They can't get an airplane ticket because
Yeah.
they don't have a credit card or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
For sure.
for us, because we fell into that role early, we were able to do it. But like the kids that I know now, they need managers, like every single one of them.
Yeah.
Like if they got offered a tour in Europe, they couldn't buy plane tickets to get there, because you have to buy your plane tickets like 3 months out.
Right.
And that's something that, you know, you understand. It's the logistics of touring, the initial outlay that you have to make, where you have to book stuff way ahead of time.
Yeah.
It adds up. I mean,
Yeah.
there were times where we would go out on the road and I'd be 10 grand in the hole before we even got on the plane.
Right.
Between all the flights that I had already purchased, the merchandise I'd already made, and all that sort of stuff. And that's you have to be willing to take that on. And yeah, I mean, it's tough. And then we also saw, you know, we toured we headline, but we also were always willing to open for someone much bigger than us, which I think a lot of acts weren't, because they would put ego ahead.
Yeah,
So
of course.
we were able to make decisions, which we made some bad ones, you know, but
What was
like,
your favorite tour that you went on?
well, favorite not in a good way, but good manager stories and stuff. There was a group called the Flowbots. I don't know if you remember them.
Yeah, yeah.
And they were these young kids from Colorado, and they had this whole like anti-American, like not anti-American, but they were like, you know, America's in distress.
Right.
And this was during the tail end of the Bush era, and it was really easy to be that group at that time.
Yeah.
Their manager left almost $10,000 in a hotel room in Canada on accident.
Oh shit.
And they called us and they were like, "We need to go back, all of us." I'm like, "We don't need to do anything. No, you guys left your money there. The money was gone."
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But it's just shit like that. Oh, sorry, I don't know if I can curse.
No, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's all good.
But we did a show in Ohio at they had a single on rock radio, and like K-Rock had added their song right at the beginning of the tour, so we were opening for them, and you know, the way the song was perceived on the coast was different than how it was perceived in Middle America.
Right.
So we get out to, you know, Ohio. I forget where we were, in the middle of Ohio, and we were playing some convention center, and all these white supremacists rolled up to the like we were backstage, and there was a balcony, and we could see the parking lot. Confederate flags, neo-Nazis, everyone's coming to the show because they were under the impression that the song was like a throwback.
Right.
Like, so, you know, that tour was interesting because we got to see this group who felt so strong that they lived in a bubble.
Yeah.
And they got out in the real world
Yeah.
and they realized that like it wasn't, you know, it's not always like that.
Sure. I mean, we hear that now as I talk to DJs who fly around the country and play, right? And a lot of the kids in the clubs are Trump supporters.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and you even got to think about your set.
Yeah,
know?
yeah. You can't, I mean, things have become so polarized. I don't think you can assume because you make hip hop or because you play dance music or whatever it is, you can't just assume that when you roll up at your spot that everyone's going to agree with you.
There's a Michael Rappaport video right now, and like came out yesterday, that like he's like yelling at people like, how can you be a hip hop fan and a racist, right? How can that coexist in one person?
Right.
And you know, and I get that thinking like, but there is a lot of those.
There is more than I even realized. You know, I got legitimate death threats via Instagram, and I'm not. You know, we've never been a very political group.
Sure.
We've kept that out of our music.
Yeah.
We've tried to be as inclusive as possible, which I think is one of the things that helped us stay around.
Yeah.
But you know, every once in a while I would say something, and I honestly, I was just trying to encourage people to vote on Instagram. I was just like, make sure you go out and vote. I don't care who you vote for. And people, you know, started arguing in the comments, and it's, you know, and
Wow.
every time you see, you know, I think what's really been crazy in this cycle now that we're in is that people have an expectation of the artist that they love.
Yeah.
And when they find out that it doesn't fit that expectation, they get really ass hurt. Like that's when you get guys Dimebag Darryling you on stage. Like
Sure.
the fans can be a little bit over the top.
Yeah.
And not all the artists are sensitive to that, but I think if you have a big fan base, you have to tread. I mean, it's easy to be political and stuff, but you got to tread light. You got to respect people's views, I think, you know,
Yeah.
and respect your fans, you know.
So when you talked about like, you know, advising or mentoring, you know, other artists, and knowing that there are some people that need, let's say, a manager.
Yeah.
Right. What's the advice you give those people?
I think usually I ask them to be honest with themselves, and I ask them to consider what it means to self-manage, to self-release, to self-label. And that means, you know, in part, are you willing to take a loan out to hire a publicist?
Yeah.
Or are you willing to put it on a credit card? Are you willing to buy plane tickets to a festival that's been booked in January, but it doesn't happen until, you know, August?
Right.
Can you shoulder that responsibility financially? Can you shoulder the responsibility of answering all the emails, doing things correctly? Because when you're getting ready to go to the festival, you've got the catering person, you've got all these people reaching out to you. Are you willing to correspond with these people?
So what about so let's say you need a manager, right? But, you know, what is the right, like, you should watch your business anyway,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So how do you do that? How would you advise somebody to do that, right? So they're going to hire a manager. They're not
Right.
going to do everything themselves, but you still don't want to get taken advantage of. You still don't want like your career to fall apart because you're not paying attention to it.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't know. I
I mean, it's not an easy question.
No.
So
And I mean, I would say that, you know, to be completely honest, both my wife, my family, a lot of my friends, their biggest complaint about me is that I'm incapable of sort of giving up control to other people. Like,
yeah,
you know, if I'm like, hey, we need to release a new T-shirt this fall, I've already taught myself how to use Illustrator and do graphic design. I'm
Right.
upstairs at 3 a.m. doing the T-shirt
Right.
instead of delegating the responsibility to other people. That's not only is that one of my biggest sort of, I think, flaws, but it's also one of the things that's kept us probably from
sure.
making it bigger. When we just did a soft goods release, and we sell a lot of soft goods. So I made 350 hoodies. They sold in like 10 minutes.
Nice.
Then it took me a month to ship them because I ship them.
Right.
Because I don't trust someone to get in there and deal with because I have had interns and I've had people, especially, you know, like millennials got like they got like a really bad rap. But all my experiences with millennials interns it was like dead nuts on like, and it happened a couple times, and I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna do it myself.
Just do it. Yeah.
But
Well,
that's not the right way always.
But it's funny you say that, right? So I work with a lot of really successful people, and I know, and you hear, and there's a lot of that, right? There's a lot of perfectionism. There's a lot of people that need to be in control. And what I always say to those people is, that's what got you to this point, right? That if you didn't have that, and it's also what's going to keep you at this point.
Yes.
Right. And so it's like you have to, well, what I would say is like, ask yourself, what are you giving up in order to keep doing it this way? Right. And what, you know, how much risk are you willing to take that something goes wrong in exchange for not having to do it yourself?
Right.
And every person has to find the right balance. It's not, you know, there's no right answer.
No, and I mean that's directly, you know, relates to your initial question. Is like, how do you keep track of the business but also delegate the responsibility to a manager or assistant or whatever? And I'm the wrong person to ask. I'm a good example of someone who stayed a middle class musician because I haven't been able to put a team together that we can take to the next level. And I think if that would be the only thing, if I could go back and do it all over again, I might have set things up in a different way, that if I were to die, the whole thing wouldn't die with me.
Right.
And that's the scariest thing. It's like,
Sure.
I'm the only one who knows how to do all this stuff, and I've been really bad about teaching other people how to do it.
Well, I mean, you know, there's always time.
Yeah, that's true.
But, you know, you say middle-class musician like that's a bad thing, but it's also like, it's also amazing to be able to live your life a certain way, doing what you love and and support a family and a business
Yeah.
doing that, right?
Yeah.
And there's millions of people that would love to have that.
Yeah, I've reconciled myself to the fact there'll never be a year where I make $1 million off music, but there may be many years where we make 100,000.
Right.
And that's, it's not.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah. What
It doesn't fit into the art. Like, so my son now, I've been doing this since before he was born.
Right.
And now he's in 5th grade.
Yeah.
And people say, "What does your dad do?" He's a rapper.
Yeah.
And they're like,
oh.
And then then they look it up and they're like, yeah, he's not really, he's not like Gucci Mane. And he's like, it doesn't fit.
Right. Where's the role?
Yeah, like your dad drives I see your dad dropping off in a RAV4.
Right.
Like it's a weird thing.
Well, I think none of us should be in the business of impressing our son's friends.
No,
That's
definitely not number one. But it puts you in a weird thing when you're like, go to the PTA meeting and everyone's introducing themselves with what they do.
Right.
And I always lie. I'm always like, they're like, "So what do you do, Mr. Portugal?" I'm like, "Well, I'm in the entertainment industry, work in production." I never ever say anything about rapping because
funny.
I don't want
for
parents to be,
Right.
people are weird.
I get it. So, but you have built a merch business and a touring business, which is two things that I think hip hop has done really poorly.
Yes.
Right. Back to genres.
Yeah.
Let me find my question. How do you figure out what works and adjust accordingly?
I mean, it's a great question because I think of all the genres, there wasn't a group that we could look at and go, they aged gracefully.
Right.
They did it right. There weren't.
Doesn't happen.
Doesn't happen. There are people who are still touring and who are healthy, which is in hip hop is, like Master Ace is on tour somewhere right now.
Right.
De La Soul is on tour somewhere right now.
Yeah.
But there's I can name them on one hand, the guys who passed the age of 40 and are healthy enough to still
Even
tour.
Jay-Z's having trouble selling this tour.
Right. So
which is unfathomable, right?
Yeah,
I mean, the rock band that's 50 slots down lower than Jay-Z on popularity will kill it on tour every year.
Yeah. And I think it's a testament to what we were talking about way earlier, that the ideas of this sort of giant sea change artist, they don't fit into that lack of genre, playlist, Pandora thing that this world we live in now. It's hard for me to imagine another Taylor Swift coming out.
Yeah.
Because I just feel like my daughter, who's 8, she'd much rather listen to she's all in she's like, "Oh, I like SZA, but I like this one." She's on some and she's 8.
Yeah.
She's not waiting for the industry to tell her to like some new star.
Right.
They're on YouTube going, they're short attention span and so I think the days of those stars, Beck drops a new album, which is dope, but Beck's new album is parallel with the new, you know what I mean? There's no value in someone being a massive star anymore.
Right.
They get the same
For
airplay, the
sure.
same amount of time.
For sure. Have there been times along the way that you've questioned the mission?
Oh yeah. Yeah,
What keeps you going?
I promised my wife probably 4 times I would retire.
Yeah.
Officially retire. And she was like, "Well, what are you going to do after you retire?" I was like, "Well, teach."
Okay.
Teach where? I'm like, at the college.
There's a place, yeah.
Yeah, there's a place somewhere where someone would want to listen to what I have to say about this. But then every time I would say that, without a doubt, the phone would ring and it'd be something like the first time this happened, we were about to get married. And I said, the week after we get married, we settle into our new house, I'm done. Done in the music industry, I'm moving on. The 4th day of day 7, the phone rang and it was Mike Moore, our agent. He's like, "Hey man, I hope you're sitting down, you're not gonna believe this, but The Simpsons called and they want you guys to be on the 20th anniversary special alongside Flea and Hugh Hefner."
Nice.
And I was just like, hold on. "Hey, babe, I'm not retiring." And he's like, "And while you're in New York at the studio, I've got a college," and then it was and then I'm like, "All right, well, the retirement is postponed."
Sure.
And so having that happen so many times where something, every time I feel down on it and I feel like, man, I should just stop, I know that there's the possibility that something will come unexpected.
Sure.
It's like playing a slot machine in Vegas.
That's great. I mean,
keeps me going.
that's a cool way to go out for sure.
Yeah.
So we were talking before about the competitive nature of hip hop, and I think, you know, hip hop and graffiti. I've had a lot of graffiti artists on the show, and we talk about like that. You know, it's the only art form, like visual art, where there's a battle.
Right.
And
right,
hip hop's kind of the same way, right? That it's just ingrained to that. So, so I know you've had some battles with will.i.am.
Yeah. We had issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the beat battle thing, they did 3 of the original ones, and we were slated to do the 3rd one. But what they didn't realize when they booked it is that me and Will had already had some run-ins.
Yeah.
And it had to do with a girl I was dating, and a girl he was, and it was like, you know, we just didn't like each other.
Yeah.
So there was definitely an added element to that. But for me at least, the energy that's drawn from that, and I'm sure the graph writers feel the same way. I mean, the thing that kept, I think, hip hop evolving from the beginning was the competitive nature of it, was the battling. I mean, it's what made dudes stop wearing leather and doing disco rap, because the younger dudes were coming on and just rapping in a circle around it. You know?
Sure.
So I don't see that anymore in hip hop, and I don't find inspiration in hip hop because I don't feel competitive with Lil Uzi Pump or Lil Yacht or any Lil person. There's no reason for me to. I don't feel any reason that there's no. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not amped up by it.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's kind of a bummer that doesn't exist, and I think that having a scene in a genre like underground hip hop, I think was really good for that. You know, a new 12-inch would come out and they'd be like, "Oh, did you hear that new 12-inch?" Now it's like, I listen to stuff that comes out, and I'm like, that's cool, and I'm just gonna keep making my music. But I wish it would come back. Like, I wish someone would come and diss me super hard so I could get in the studio and be like, all right, you know, light a fire under my ass, you know.
All right, you hear that?
Somebody
Give it to him.
Somebody diss the sweatshirts I made, or you know, I don't know. It doesn't seem life or death anymore. Like, there was a period in time where hip hop felt life or death to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, it used to. I remember, you know, when Meek Mill Drake thing was happening, and it was like, well, you know, I remember talking to people about, like, 10 years ago that would have ruined one of them's career.
Yeah,
that would have ruined Meek's career for sure, right?
Yeah.
Now it's ruined for other reasons, but
same thing with Nicki Minaj and like all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. You know, and now like the Eminem thing, I thought was cool. I'm glad he did that. You know, the Trump thing and whatever, but it wasn't like, you know, it didn't have the fire of a lot of his other diss records.
No.
You know what I mean? And I think some of that is just probably where he's at, but some of it is also like, you know, there wasn't some dude that's gonna fire back, and although he probably wasn't worried about Nick Cannon firing back either.
Right. I mean, it's just the whole thing is kind of homogenized, you know. Like, I mean, there's TV shows where they rap battle.
Yeah.
You know, and like, there's a big difference between a TV show with a rap battle and the Bitch in You by like.
For sure.
I thought they were gonna shoot him because of that record. I'm like, dude, you went hard on this dude.
Yeah.
Calling him a bitch and his mom. I mean, like going ham on someone on record.
Yeah. Or toss it up, or like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there's so many diss records, so many.
For sure.
Like, just some of them super regrettable, like cringeworthy. When you listen to it, you're like, fuck, dude, like, it's gnarly.
All right, I got to get to a lightning round before we get out of here.
All right.
Tell me one decision that changed your life forever.
Signing to own records.
Okay.
Because we would own the rights to San Francisco Nights. We'd own the rights to Acid Raindrops, all these songs that have made them millions of dollars over the years. And if a portion of that had come into our pocket, my life would be slightly different right now.
For sure.
Yeah.
Complete this sentence. I don't have talent. I have blank.
That's my story of my life. I don't have talent. I have just business drive. Like, you know, like I make up for my lack of talent with just a willingness to work.
Okay. That's good. So if I worked for you, what's something I would hear you say over and over?
Let me do it. Never mind, let me do it.
All right.
Horrible, man.
Who would you be most excited to learn as a fan of yours?
Barack Obama. And I could see it too. I could kind of see it happening. You know?
Yeah.
I'm sure he would jam out to some of our music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your favorite city to travel to?
Probably Honolulu.
So
Yeah. They have a great scene out there. They've got great
Yeah.
promoters, and I mean, it doesn't feel as competitive like promotion wise out there. Like I feel like when an artist comes to Hawaii, everybody is like celebrates it.
yeah.
Here, if you're at one venue, the other
Right,
venues
right.
are like, oh well, it looks like we're not booking you ever again.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, for sure. Is there a book that's had the biggest impact on you?
Yeah. I think it's called A Surfing Life by Finnegan. And he writes for the New Yorker now, but it's about his life as a surfer and exploring. There's a lot of parallels to making music and touring, you know. So
Nice.
that book had a huge impact on me.
Cool. What movie do you think you've seen the most in your life?
Be a toss-up between Caddyshack, Beat Street, and this movie called Fly By Night, which is the best, worst hip-hop movie ever made.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh, I'm
if
gonna look
anyone
for that.
hasn't seen Fly By Night, I highly recommend checking it out.
I was trying to show my son Beat Street over the weekend. We ended up watching something else, but we'll get
Street-
there. Beat Street's great.
People can say what they want about B Street. I know it's people like to go back and go, well, that wasn't a real hip hop movie. Wild Style's a better movie. But if you were a kid
Yeah.
and that was your
sure.
like, it's an amazing movie.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah. Fly By Night. I'm gonna look for that.
Yeah, Fly By Night's horrid,
I don't know it.
but it's good in a
Okay.
bad way. Yeah,
I mean, Caddyshack's amazing.
classic movie. Yeah.
For sure. Who's your favorite DJ?
J-Rock.
So
Yeah, followed by Z-Trip and Jazzy Jeff and
Yeah.
DJ Day and like just a bunch of friends. But I would say J-Rock for sure.
dope. Thanks for doing this, man. I appreciate
thanks-
you
thanks for having
being
me.
here.
Yeah.
How's everybody find you?
Best way
And buy merch.
to follow the merch releases is to follow me on Instagram,
Okay.
and that's at PeaceLock70. Or if you just search for Thes1, you'll find me on there. I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on Twitter. Pretty much just picked one lane and I do that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean,
Is that a good idea for artists?
I think so, because I think the phone is a huge distraction.
Yeah.
And I think if you're managing 3 accounts, you don't have time. Boredom is the impetus for all creativity. The boreder you are, the easier it is to, I think, create art. And I think that this takes boredom out of our lives, and we're just constantly tuned in and
It's amazing.
can't make music like that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That's good. That's good advice.
Yeah. Hopefully, I don't know. I try to make myself as bored as possible.
Nice.
Hey, that was Thes1 on Rebel Radio. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Make sure you leave us a comment on Twitter at Rebel Radio Net. Leave us a review on iTunes. We'll take your 5 stars. And you can find us on Facebook as well. Check out our YouTube page. Most importantly, come back next week for more Rebel Radio. Peace.